Welcome to episode 13 of Amateur Hour CX, a podcast on the state of cycling from our point of view in the grassroots ranks, or pretty much whatever strikes Eric's fancy based on who he could trick to come on the show today. I'm Mark Walling, and here's your host, Eric Schillinger.
Hello, Taylor. It's nice to speak with you. I'm very excited to talk to you today. How are you?
Yeah, nice to meet you too. I'm doing well. I've had a little bit of a funny evening. I just got suddenly admitted to the ER. Did you see my response to the email?
No, I didn't. Wait, oh my God, what happened? Are we doing our first podcast live on location from the ER in some Philadelphia hospital?
Actually, in my own studio. I'm not still in the ER, but do you have time for a quick story?
We have about an hour and a half for as long a story as you want.
So I signed up for my health insurance with my job this year and selected a PCP on IBX Express, and I had never been to them. And I was like, I think a thing that adults do is like go to the doctor just for like a routine checkup, every once in a while. And it had been a long time since I did that. So I was really proud of myself to do like a big adult thing and just go to the doctor for a routine checkup. Made an appointment. Got all my, my vitals, my eyes checked. And she's like, you know what, since it's been a while, like maybe I'll have you go to LabCorp and do like some cholesterol, a cholesterol check. And we might as well do these EKGs as well. So, they had me stripped down and they put the, the sensors, like around your wrists and your ankles and your heart. And the technician took my EKGs and then kind of left me in the room for a really long time, just like lying with this paper dress on, thinking like, wow, this is really taking a long time. And he came back and he's like, I'm just gonna take those again. And I'm okay, better to be thorough. I have no idea what I'm telling myself at this point. So he takes the EKGs again. He takes all the sticky things off, places them on again. And then he's like, okay, I'm just going to go run this past the doctor. I'll just be right back. Takes forever for him to come back. And he comes back with the doctor and she has my results printed out and she had just kind of chicken scratched on top of the chart. Go to ER now.
Oh, God.
And I'm like, oh, shit. What? This is totally not what I expected. Like, I am in prime health as far as I'm concerned. And this was just, like a pretty extra thing that I'm doing is just like going to the doctor to be a responsible adult. So they're like, we're going to call you a cab. You're just going to go to the ER right now. Like there's some abnormalities in your heart, like electrical patterns or whatever. We want you to see a cardiologist in the emergency room now. And I'm like, well, okay, there's, no arguing with that. So I go to the emergency room and the doctor's like, by the way, just tell them that you're having chest pain when you go there. And I'm like, I'm not having any chest pain. And she's like, it'll get you to the top of the list. So that's what you got to do. And I was like, okay, that's what I've got to do. So go to they take another EKG immediately when I arrive at the emergency room and take me back. The doctor comes in. So you're having chest pain. And I was like, actually, I just came out. Actually, I'm not. The PCP that sent me here told me to tell you that. And he kind of like, okay, rolls his eyes, whatever. But, got me in fast. And he looks at the printed out chart that I had brought from the PCP and takes it, leaves the room. Long story short, he comes back and he's like, I don't know who the hell you saw, but I think that you could go see a cardiologist. but it's not an emergency. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to pay the copay for being here. Like, is there a cardiologist here I could just talk to? And he's like, why don't we run an EKG again? And I'm like, actually, you've already done that. You have already done another EKG since I got to the emergency room. Maybe you can just look at those results and compare them. And I'm like, who am I counseling an emergency room doctor on how to do his job? I felt like a little bit out of place. Anyway, he ended up looking at the EKG results that they had done there in the emergency room and kind of comes back into the room where I'm waiting with them in his hand, laughing almost victoriously. And he's like, you're going to get a kick out of this or something. And he's like, do you exercise? And I was like, yeah, I do exercise. And he's like, how often? And I was like, maybe like 6 or 7 days a week. And he's like how vigorously do you exercise? And I was like, I exercise pretty vigorously. I race bikes on the weekend, and then I try and like get my body prepared to race bikes on the weekend. And he's like, so what are we talking here? Like 50 miles? And I was like, oh, mileage? Maybe like 100 to 200 miles in a week. And he's like, he just kind of bursts out into laughter again. And he's like, yeah, I mean, it would be alarming if my EKG chart came out looking like this. But he's like kind of joking with me now and like putting himself under the bus. He's like, you just have a strong heart, And he's like, I don't know. It seems like your PCP's just never seen an athlete's EKG heart before. So anyway, I'm totally fine. Turns out that also perhaps the technician that installed the EKGs on me initially may have installed them upside down. So there are a couple of problems that led to me being in the emergency room earlier and being discharged just with a stupid hospital bill or emergency room bill. But other than that, I'm in great health.
You going to fire your PCP?
Yeah, it was the first visit to that PCP I had ever had. So I'm actually going to try and get her to cover my hospital bill, my emergency room bill.
The only thing I can think to say is thanks, Obama.
Yeah.
So wait a minute. Let me just break this down. You're super fit and in great health, and you are a legitimate, I think, Category 2 road racer. And for those of us out there who aren't in the medical community, your primary care physician thought that you were having like a cardiac episode and needed to immediately go to the hospital because you're in good shape.
Apparently there are normal operating limits for these for the heart, and mine was outside of normal operating limits, but maybe just on the wrong side of outside.
Having the EKG upside down probably didn't help.
Yeah, I mean, you can see, I have them both in front of me right now, but actually, like, the discharge paperwork says, your EKG here was normal for someone who exercises as regularly and vigorously as you do. The EKG done at the other office was likely abnormal, secondary to improper technique and lead placement issues. So it's just like a funny double whammy. But also, interestingly enough, I got kind of petty and posted about this on Instagram in a series of stories, and a bunch of cyclists have responded to me to basically tell me the same thing has happened to them.
So this is not actually that uncommon in the cycling community. Do you think it's because
nobody else said that they were sent to the emergency room, but other people are like, yeah, I've been told to see a cardiologist. Like, I always have to get my blood pressure taken 2 times, et cetera, that people are like, yeah, generally, if you have a strong, fit heart, they're concerned. Like, because your resting heart rate's really low, or like the ER doctor was saying something about like the polarization and the electricity of my heart was super pronounced. And I don't really know what that means, and that's probably not the right words, but
Do you think it has anything to do with you being related to Iron Man?
The relation. I forgot to explain that relationship while I was.
Do you have one of those like nuclear reactor things in your chest where you can shoot energy balls out of it? That would do it.
I was trying to think of like all the little things, it's like funny how you psych yourself out, where I'm like, maybe I am having chest pain, or like my legs were a little shaky earlier today. It just, everything starts to.
You start to convince yourself that, you probably did 10 VO2 max intervals today or something, but instead of thinking that maybe you feel that way because you did that, you're like, oh, I must be having a heart attack because I feel slightly tired.
Yeah, all the questions, like the ER doc was like, so do you ever have shortness of breath or pain in your chest? I'm like, yeah, every time I race, that's exactly what it feels like. And he's like, you ever pass out? And I'm like, I've come close, but no, and I'm like, actually, I don't think these are the answers that he's looking for, anyway. So that was my adventure for the afternoon.
I mean, that's a pretty solid way to introduce yourself to our community of listeners. Absolutely. So you said that you race bikes on the weekend, and you try to get yourself ready to race bikes during the week.
Right.
And are you on a road team?
So, my team all year round at this point is Philly Bike Expo. So
what is the Philly Bike Expo? That's probably the most important question I can ask.
Well, we can talk about the Bicycle Coalition as well. I want to talk about all the things, but the Philly Bike Expo, maybe I'll tell you the story of how I got involved with them.
Yes, please.
It's a pretty special one for me. When I first moved to Philly, this is kind of the wandering entrance to the story of how I got involved with Gina and Steven. But when I first moved to Philly, I came here from Tucson, Arizona, and I had kind of developed this budding passion for working on bikes, working with youth on bikes, working like refurbishing old bikes, and you basically just doing anything, not really working in bike shops, but kind of community co-ops, like education-focused nonprofits. So when I moved to Philly, I was like, okay, what's the bike place that's not just a for-profit bike place in Philly? And the one that I found was Neighborhood Bike Works. So I worked there for a number of years, and kind of just came time for a transition. So I kind of retired from that position and took a couple months off to go ride the Great Divide. And while I was on the Great Divide, I was thinking, it was just the year previous that I had ever tried racing a bike. And on the Great Divide, I was like, this is a lot of time to think, how does bike racing fit into my life? Do I want to really go at it, or do I want to just let it be kind of like a fun afterthought, punctuation mark to the other stuff in my life? And it was kind of just one of the questions, one of the themes I was letting sink in on that trip. And it happened kind of like one day. I was like, I'm going to fucking do it. I really want to race bikes as good as I can this year. And so I'm going to return to Philly, get a job and do cyclocross as good as I can do cyclocross. And I think it was like one of those days that I, called Dan Chabnoff from the trail, and I was like, I want to do this coaching thing with you. I want to figure out how to be the best athlete that I can be. But at that point it was like September, and I was like,
wait, stop. What do you mean you called Dan Chabanoff? Dan Chabanoff is like our longtime Nycross buddy. What do you mean when you say I called Dan Chabanoff from the trail?
He's a friend of mine. So, and I knew that he had a business coaching. And so it was kind of like in that moment of slushing some of these thoughts around, I was like, let me call and talk through this with Dan.
So you're shredding some single track, and then you're just like, I think I'll just whip my phone out and just have a substantial life-altering conversation with Chabanoff just right now on the phone.
Exactly. I mean, I was shredding some single track for 46 days in a row, so it wasn't like, let me just take a like a break from this bike ride and like call Dan. It was like one of the things that I did during my life on that journey.
I'm not thinking about the fact that you would obviously have to do things like that while doing what. So that ride, explain what that ride is. Is that a competitive thing, or is that like a can you do it thing? And maybe those are both.
It is both of those things, but I took it on as a leisure tour with 2 other friends. So it was just like a bike tour, an off-road. Some people call it bike packing these days. We just put our camping stuff on our bicycles and then rode an off-road trail that's fire roads, single track, a little bit of road from Banff, Canada, down to Antelope Wells, Mexico. So when I say called Dan from the trail, it was like one of the days. I think we had just gotten into New Mexico and we were really starting to like come to the end of our journey and like think about returning back home. And even though it was like, it's I was away from Philly for like 2 months total. It's like kind of momentous. Like you get to be away from your life and think about your life and decide what you want your life to look like. And then you get to go back to your life and like create it that way, So I really like having opportunities to like push the reset button in that way. And I kind of got to dream up what does my relationship to racing look like while I was there. And Dan was one of the first people that I called to kind of like seek counsel from and ask like, hey, will you help me figure out how to do this?
So what did he tell you?
He was like, yes, I will. That's what he told me. And
of course, you're on a trail in New Mexico somewhere, so you're not like necessarily going to sort that all out right then. You're just like, okay, back on the bike, keep going. Or was there more detail?
I think I kind of in that moment was like, yeah, so like, can I start doing workouts like right now? And he was basically like, no, no, you're riding, 70, 80, 90 miles a day of fully loaded bike packing, like you just have to do that ride and we'll figure this out when you get back. And I think I kind of was bummed. I think I was like I really wanted to like feel like I was building cyclocross fitness then, So
you wanted to start doing interval workouts in the middle of a 46-day bike tour. The Great Divide wasn't a big enough challenge. You needed to throw in some over-under workouts or something.
I never raced really, but like I had never trained. I had never really been an athlete, so I didn't know what it would be like to sign up with a coach and like train to race bikes. Let
me ask you about that, because you're not the first person we've had on who's said that they didn't think of themselves as an athlete, that they somehow fell into riding bicycles and becoming a competitive racer in some sort of atypical way.
Right.
What were you doing before you were riding bikes?
Oh, no, I had always been riding bikes. I just hadn't been racing them or considering myself an athlete.
Okay. Let's back the truck way up. How old are you?
I'm 30 years old.
Okay, so you're 30. When is this that you're talking to Dan about this? I mean, it can't be that long ago. Dan moved to Philly 2 or 3 years ago?
That was 2016. I guess it must have been like August of 2016.
So you've always ridden bikes. I understand that. I also say I've always ridden bikes. Mm-hmm. Were you go back in time? Sure. What was the first bike that you were riding?
Okay. Well, the first bike that I had as an adult was a Peugeot Mixty that I got. I'm sorry. No, it was a Raleigh that I got at
That's an important differentiation.
Please, it is.
No, it is. I'm not being sarcastic. A Peugeot and a Raleigh are very different in the world of bike people.
The second bike that I built was a Peugeot Mixty, so I just confused the timeline. And the woman that I bought it for at the garage sale was like, I bought this at another garage sale and I fixed it up. And she was like so proud. And I was like, that is really one of the coolest things I've ever heard. And I like thought it was a really beautiful bike, and I rode it as a townie, a commuter. I commuted commuted all throughout college. I lived off campus in Prescott, Arizona, where I went to college, and then
Are you from Arizona? Where are you from?
no, I'm from Michigan.
Oh.
I grew up in Michigan.
In which part of Michigan? The part that looks like a hand, or the part that is stuck in Lake Superior?
Grand Rapids, so right in the middle of the mitten.
Right in the middle of the mitten.
Yeah. And then I started just kind of going on longer joyrides after getting out of classes. Like on my way home, I'd just like ride past my house and head into the mountains a little bit and try and find some dirt roads, and just kind of like built this relationship to just like, the open road, you know?
Yeah.
And I developed that more and more, and I found this class that was being offered at my very tiny college called The Bicycle, a Vehicle for Social Change. And I was like, what the heck is this? That sounds like the ideal combination of like some of my budding interests. So
Yeah, this sounds spectacular. I would sign up for that right now if I could.
Yeah, I signed up for this class, and this woman, Sue Knapp, facilitated the course, and she became one of my first cycling and advocacy mentors. She runs a nonprofit in Prescott called One Street, and her husband ran a cycling nonprofit in Prescott, super tiny town, by the way, called Prescott Alternative Transportation. And so they were like the bicycle advocacy like captains of the town.
Where is Prescott?
It's in between Flagstaff and Phoenix, so it's a pretty high elevation.
Yeah. So is that like 5,000 feet or so?
Yeah, it's above a mile high. So we got like full seasons there and everything.
Side note, that's one of my favorite. I've been to Northern Arizona a bunch of times. That's one of my favorite things about that part of the world, is that elevation dictates what your weather is like and what your climate is like, not like latitude. You're super far south, but you're super far high, so you get winter. Yeah.
I forget about that too. I've been like trying to plan a trip for February or something where I can just go, ride in a warmer climate. And I was like, I've always wanted to go to Santa Fe. I'll go to Santa Fe in February. No, not a good idea if you want to go out there and ride, because they're also at like 7,000 feet of elevation, I think. So.
Yeah, isn't there? There's this huge ski area near Santa Fe. Isn't it like Angel Fire, New Mexico, or something? It's like they get full blown real winter.
Yeah. So rethinking that one. Maybe I'll go to Belize. Anyway, where were we? So yeah, bikes, and then some more bikes, and then here I am.
So you're on this. You're riding the Great Divide, literally, and you come back to Philly having decided that this is kind of a life-changing experience, and you're going to really devote yourself to the work of advocacy for bicycle riding as an element of social change. Is that a good summary of what happens?
There's kind of a lot in between that, because let's see, I graduated from college in the winter
I'm
of
so
2011.
old. Don't say things like that.
Well, I didn't go to college right after high school, but yes, I'm sure
you're
you are very old. I did take a few years off in between high school and college, so I was a non-typical aged freshman, but wasn't all that long ago. So I had been kind of building this this path of passion for bicycles, which at that time was very much like rebuilding, upcycling bicycles, like queer dance parties and basement co-ops, like working with youth on mechanics skills and leadership. A little bit of a different flavor than the work that I'm doing now, because it's kind of evolved along with me. So I came to Philly, that bloomed in 2015. I did my first cyclocross race, which was Grenoble, so just about exactly 3 years ago now, and got hooked immediately. And that's when I found out about, well, the Bicycle Coalition, where I work now, has a youth education program, and they had a team at Neighborhood Bike Works. So at Neighborhood Bike Works, we called that team the race team. So the race team athletes, to me, always seemed like the really cool, like popular, funny, confident teenagers. Whereas like all the youth that I worked with at Neighborhood Bike Works, in like the most endearing way possible, just always seemed like we, and like, big we here, were just kind of like the nerds and the outcasts, but just like found a home in like wrenching together in a dingy bike shop and like, talking about our goals and dreams in the world and what it's like to live in this crazy world. And then the race team athletes would show up, and they're just, like whipping their hair, not actually, but like, sexy fan here. Like they were, to me, like, and I think to some of the other MBW youth, like real hot stuff as far as like, teen stars go. And so when I started racing and I like learned more about the Bicycle Coalition program, I found, like, I think maybe 6 months later or something, I got a call from their education director asking me to apply for the program manager position because it would be opening. So somehow I magically managed to find myself in this position where I was able to, all right, awesome, I've lived this full, life with Neighborhood Bike Works. I'm going to resign from this position, take a couple months off, go clear my head, ride this Great Divide thing. I actually snuck in like a road trip across the country, raced the Shenandoah 100, and then came back to Philly and like started this new chapter with the Bicycle Coalition, managing the youth cycling team of, who I thought were just like the really cool the really cool athletes that I had seen around Neighborhood Bike Works.
So you went from sort of having these people as maybe not necessarily idols exactly, but sort of your people that you're looking up to, and then suddenly you're the manager of the whole group. How does that work?
Sure, yeah. And I walked into, they're teenagers that we're talking about here. So I walked into my job interview. And it was at that point, like the third stage of my job interview. I had interviewed with one person over the phone. Then I had come in, interviewed with two people in person. I came in and interviewed with the entire staff. And then I came in to interview with youth leaders. And there were 4 youth sitting around the table. And I opened the door to the interview, and they all were like, "What? Oh my God, Miss Taylor, it's you." So I got the feeling like, okay, maybe this admiration is a little bit, it's not one way, it's a little bit mutual, that like, they had no idea that I was applying for the job. So when I walked into the interview, I think we caught each other by surprise. It was a really cool moment. So,
that's spectacular.
Yeah, anyway, I've come to learn, I think, again, in a very endearing way, that the athletes that I so thought just like had everything so polished and together, and like were on top of the world, and like clearly the most popular kids in their school, like maybe that's not the reality on the ground so much, that it is like a little bit of like the youth that are wearing this funny spandex kit around their, Northeast Philly public school, like they're totally the black sheep, and like they take all sorts of flack for looking funny wearing sporting outfits in their school, but when they come together in the program, like it's just like a different persona. It's a different feeling. Like they are on top of the world, and they are like, you know, behind the glamour fan when they're around each other, when they're on bikes, when they're, you know, out in the world. And I think like it's part of that magic that's just like how cool you feel and like how much you fit in and how much pride and integrity you have, and just like what like joy and I don't know, agency it is to like be free and independent. Like when you're on your bike, like you kind of just see that in a way that's like really powerful. I think when our athletes are together and we're riding together. So it was funny to just kind of catch a glimpse of that from like an outsider's perspective before I was really a part of the fold, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. Are you like a team director? What's your like title? Is that still something that is even what we call people now when they're in charge of this type of thing?
Yeah, my title is Bicycle Coalition Youth Cycling Program Manager. So that is because the youth cycling program it's just like one of the many limbs that the Bicycle Coalition has. So we also do, you know, policy, advocacy. You know, we work with Philadelphia and our streets department on infrastructure and bike lane. We host a lot of big events, community rides. And then we also facilitate education programs like Safe Routes to School or the Better Bike Share Partnership that helps to make our bike share system more equitable and accessible. And then also the youth cycling team, which brings cycling kind of as a sport to schools and community centers across the city. So it's just one of the many programs that the Bicycle Coalition runs, but it's my only wheelhouse in the Bicycle Coalition.
I see. So there's a lot of things other than the Bicycle Coalition that you are involved in, right? So there's also the actual Bike Expo. Is that a separate thing, or is that all? If I missed something, does that all go together, or that's separate?
Yeah, we've had some false starts to a number of stories, but it is separate. But they are related. What
is the Bike Expo? Just like it sounds like it's like when I think of the Bike Expo, I think of Interbike. It's not Interbike, I don't think. Is it?
It's definitely not Interbike, but it is similar to Interbike. So the Philadelphia Bike Expo is a gathering of artists, activists, and exhibitors from the bicycle industry. So everyone from, there's a big frame builder emphasis because the show was started by Stephen and Bina Belinky, and Stephen Belinky is a big frame builder. So, it kind of got this NABS flavor of, a lot of folks really coming with their frames and really like stunting on each other in this awesome way. But it's also like a really family focused and community focused show. So unlike Interbike, it's open to the public and it's, really affordable. It's in downtown Philadelphia. It's really accessible. And there is a show element to it. So a lot of people come who are just like big bike lovers that just want to like do their shopping. Like, oh, I heard about this like fanny pack company that's like making this, and this, and I want to get the newest like colorway of this, I don't know, cycling cap, or like I wanted to check out, the newest like folding lock that so-and-so is making. but it's also a way to like, learn about and see like what's cool and new. Not necessarily just in like the most cutting edge technology that like, Shimano's releasing like only on the Interbike day, but like, maybe a really cool artistic concept or, something that's a little bit more of the homegrown side. But it's not just about the show either. So there's like all sorts of super fun community oriented rides because people are coming from all over the country and like getting to really see the Philly flavor of like off-road riding, of what it's like to commute around the city. And then there's this whole other layer of all the like workshops and seminars that Bina does an incredible job of cultivating. And that's everything from, I think Philly Bike Expo has this tagline that's like artisans, activists, and alternatives. So it's really about like being a space for people to come together and vision too. So there's been, workshops and seminars and just kind of like conversations on everything from, like women's equity in, bike racing, to like athlete nutrition, to, like making a living just like touring your bike forever, to, working with local politicians to get the bike lanes of your dreams. So it's really a multifaceted event.
Let me ask you about one of those things, because we've been working on it a little bit here in upstate New York this season, is women's equity in bike racing. Do you think that there's well, I'll go out on a limb and I'll say there isn't equity between genders in bike racing. I don't think anybody's going to be shocked at that statement.
Yeah.
But what do you think? So you're a woman, you have a chance. Yeah. You've got a platform at this second.
Yeah.
What do you think like we need to do to change that? What do you think would help improve the situation? I was sending emails today with the director of the New York State Bicycle Racing Association, specifically talking about the fact that there's like literally 5% participation by women or something along those lines. I don't know what the number is.
Yeah.
How do we change that? What do we need to see to maybe get it somewhat representative? Let's say we had 20% participation by women. It would be 4 times more than we have now,
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to be real honest and say that I'm just like a little bit tired. I'm like a little bit tired of fighting for gender equity in this sport. And I'm a little bit like ruffled and forlorn and just freaking tired, and I'm not like done doing the work or done having things to say about it. But I almost have this feeling that's like, oh, yep, I'm a woman in bike racing, gotta talk about how much it still sucks to be a woman in bike racing.
Well, let me stop you right there. Does it suck to be a woman in bike racing? I don't know, right?
It really does. It really sucks to be a woman in this industry.
Okay. What's the? And I mean, I know we can't solve this problem with this conversation, but what's like? Give me 2 examples of things that suck that you don't think happen to men, and I'm sure there are lots of things that don't happen to men. I don't mean that in a challenging way. I want to hear it.
Like from working in the industry.
Yeah, maybe give me like one industry example and maybe one like competition style example.
Okay. I think like access to employment, access to training opportunities, a culture that is like safe and productive for women. I think that like examples are hard because it like pigeonholes what it feels like to like move through the entire industry as a woman. Like it's like I'm sure that I could, but I like giving you an example that would really be a powerful story or like really give truth to the weight that it is to carry, to like be a non-dominant identity in the bike industry is like dismissing the entire culture that is that marginalizes and kind of like is abusive towards anyone that's not like a white cisgendered man. So I think I'm having a hard time just being like, here's the example that is going to paint the picture of the problem of equity in the sport. Does that make sense?
Your answer is way more valuable than anyone could have just said by saying, well, I go on group rides and sometimes the dudes are like, hey, yo, do you know how to ride in the pace line? Because they act like I don't know how. That's I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's a giant systematic problem that's really not just unique to the bike industry, but it's certainly it's our avenue to analyze it here, sitting here.
Yeah, I mean, I think like if I share the examples that I would have to share are like on a personal level, like what it's like to be in a social environment as a cyclist, like as a female cyclist. I think that like, you're a stronger cyclist if you're able to like train with other cyclists. You have more access to development opportunities or sponsorship opportunities if you are well networked. And so it's like impossible to exactly explain how any number of these factors are a domino effect. But like, if I think about like explaining, like if I were to just give you an example of, I feel socially marginalized, even in what is really pretty radical and progressive cycling community in Philadelphia, because of the, either comments that people make at me, to me, about me on rides, makes me like further withdraw from my social cycling community. And there's a smaller community of highly competitive female cycling athletes in the city. So if I'm riding less and less with men because I don't feel good or safe or respected or cared for in the way that they're interacting with me, I'm shutting myself off from opportunities to train to my fullest capacity. I'm shutting myself off to abilities to network professionally or, my ability to get on teams. And I think sometimes it's like if you want to speak out about something that happened to you on a ride, like, somebody made a rape joke to me or it really upset me or whatever it is, that like oftentimes you build yourself this reputation of, just being a little bit of a loudmouth bitch that like, that's not a professional image or, whatever it is that maybe even further makes enemies and limits your ability to kind of have a diplomatic sponsor relationship. So it's hard to choose one example that really gives a complete picture. And
I'm probably super naive, but I mean, these are things that, people are, man, I'm really glad that you answered that way rather than say, well, somebody told me one time I didn't know how to pump up my tires because it shocks me, but it really doesn't surprise me, frankly, that people would make jokes that are that inappropriate, or that people would, take positions like that. And that, you just want to be a bike racer, right? You just want to be treated like everybody else that wants to race bikes. I would hope, right? I would think that would be, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's fair to say.
I think that, like another layer of, for me, what is like this interesting place that I'm in now, of like being an amateur bike racer that's like, got some aspirations, but I'm not really ready to like give up my whole life to like be a fake pro. I don't want to quit my day job because it means a lot to me. And but I would really love to find myself in, in a home, so to speak, with, some support and some camaraderie and some stability that allowed me to focus on being the best athlete that I could be. And I've found in different cycling communities or in different teams, I've caught glimpses of ways that women are just expected to do a lot more labor. Women are expected to speak more eloquently about the issues, to do a lot of emotional, and physical, mental work around, quote unquote, the issues. Women are expected to lead group rides, facilitate clinics, make cute videos, make incredible content, be really, gracious and proactive in ways that I don't consistently see male athletes being expected to, like, sway or market or be above and beyond community leaders. And I think that's sexist. I think that yes, I do think that athletes should be expected to do all of those things, but I see women expected to do a significant amount more labor than male counterparts and male athletes that are racing at their same level or, frankly, not even. And I think that women have to fight a lot harder and work a lot harder for what they get in the cycling industry at every level. And so I think, at least what I'm seeing, and, I'm still very green. I don't pretend to know history or be, up close and personal with, what this looked like even 5 years ago, because I wasn't around. So I don't come from a place of, the rich history and the patterns. So I don't pretend to speak with any of that. But what I see and what it looks like to me now is that there's a lot of support from women, especially for women at developmental levels. So at least around here we're seeing incredibly robust fields of Cat 5, Cat 4, 5, even Cat 3, 4 races. And then when we get to, elite categories, even at our local races, we don't have full fields. And I think it's because, but only in the women's fields, usually, that's not reflected as much in the men's elite field. And I suspect that it's a combination of, lack of support and kind of burnout that comes from swimming these waters and navigating these issues and really not seeing a lot of improvement. I've seen a lot of women, walk away from bike racing and walk away from the industry after just being pushed too far. I think we're all tired, I guess.
Do you think that it's a situation where it's worth trying to salvage it, or should we take the approach of sort of burn the house down and then maybe just build the house again somewhere else in some other way? I don't know that the problems that are present in cycling and in women's cycling are not present, say, in women's alpine ski racing or even soccer or more traditional sports that are out there. But do you think that has the ship sailed? Is it an irrevocable course of, male chauvinist, domination of this industry and this sport for so long? Or is you're tired, but is there any hope? We're trying to do women's development as a primary focus in upstate New York and work on it in a serious way. Am I too late? Are we just too late to the game?
Yeah.
Does it not matter?
No, I think that there is. I love the idea a little bit of of burning the house down and like rising a new, version from the ashes. Speaking of Interbike, I went to Interbike last year for admittedly my first year, and had a fantastic time. Loved racing across Vegas, and definitely had just one too many. I'm just here as like a token cute girl in the industry experiences, And I've heard people talking about Interbike.
When you say you're just here as a token cute girl in the industry, what do you mean? I mean, you're there with an actual job, aren't you? You're not just there to look cute.
Yeah, no, I didn't feel that I was personally there on that mission, but I was made to feel that was like, that's how I was interpreted as a person there working.
Do you think getting Interbike out of Vegas, I don't mean to suggest that just merely something as simple as its geography could have a shift, but Interbike is it's like the touchstone of the bike world. If you're in the industry, Interbike is the thing that is the big deal. And Vegas, I mean, there's 1,000 connotations to Vegas. None of them are positive. Do you think just not having it in that setting could even help? It's where it's in Reno. Okay, it's in Reno, so I don't know if that's, it's not an Amish country. But do you feel like anything like that is in play? At least it changes. It's a cultural shift a little bit, right?
Yeah, I think this is why I brought Interbike up, is because I think that this is going to be kind of a make it or break it year for Interbike. And I hear a lot of people saying like, this is it. This is the last year for Interbike. Nobody's going this year. It's going to be super small. And then in other circles, I'm hearing, women talking about organizing at Interbike. Okay, we're going to have, this forum. We're going to have this panel. Like, let's get together and have dinner this night. And like, let's talk about this, and this issue here. And like, actually, can a bunch of these folks come together and get a house? And I'm like, you know what? This could be the year that the radical feminist other side of the industry comes in and just takes over and says, you know what? Let's burn it down and start over, and it needs to look like this. And I think that like those forces are in action, and that momentum is happening and is beginning. And I think that women are. Women, trans people, femmes, like people of color, non-dominant people in the cycling world, like are doing that work. It is happening. And, the people that are the most marginalized in the cycling community need to be the ones leading that work. And this is an important, cisgendered white men that have been at the front of the industry for a long time, receiving the most benefits from the industry for the long time, receiving all of the fruits, need to still be doing the work, but allowing the work to be, led by women, led by people of color, and saying like, what is it that you need to be able to show up? What is it that you need to feel safe? What support, what does it look like to have, a factory team for women? What does it look like to cut resources from, men's only races to support races where, women's field are just as equally represented? What does it look like to put masters categories in the same start so we can have a separate 1, 2, 3 and 3, 4 women's field racing today, and allowing the people that need to be represented to be the ones to actually answer those questions.
I'm going to disagree with something that you said, and I basically agree with everything that you just said.
Okay.
But I do think that there's an element of it that we can't ignore, and I'm a cisgendered white male who says this. I don't think that we should. I say I disagree, but it's disagreeing with it with a positive spin. I don't think that we should say marginalized people have to take this responsibility and have to lead this push. And it goes back to the first thing you said to me when I asked you, what do you think about this? And you said, well, I'm frankly tired of dealing with it. I think it's critical if this industry and if this sport is going to make any changes, it's people who are in my position, who are series directors and team directors, who are traditional cisgendered white males. We have to make the commitment to it. And it's not to allow marginalized people to participate. It's that if I don't say we're going to run a women's Devo program, and it's absolutely non-negotiable, we are not ever running men's and women's races mixed together. And too bad, Masters racers, you're going to be all jammed together, but guess what? We don't care. And you know what? We don't even care if there's 50 of you and there's only 4 women. We're going to give the women a fair opportunity to use the race course. If we've done all those things you just listed off, we've done with the Nycross series over the last 2 years, 2 or 3, maybe even go back further. But if you look at our evolution of what we're doing all these things, and I can say it has had absolutely no negative effect on anything. Bottom line, participation, the time of day, officials, no one is annoyed. The only people that were annoyed were a few racers who would fit into, the traditional categories, who were upset that there was a change in when they got the time to start their race or how their races were organized. But there's been no negative effect that has had any long-term ramification. Every race should make these changes. And I think that the majority of race directors, the majority of people who are in the position to make the change, are people who are the traditional types of people running these things. I don't think I know of any. I know one woman who is a race director. Literally. I mean, I've been doing this for 15 years. I know of one woman who runs a race in New York State. I mean, it's crazy. I think it's important just not to let men off the hook, to not say, a trans guy has to come out and do this. No, if you're a traditional man, you still need to do this. You don't get off the hook just because you're a white guy,
That was my big and I think like an example of that ties together how our, both of our diatribes are actually united is like the experience that I'm sure, we've all had of reaching out to a race director after participating in an event or even before participating in an event and saying like, hey, I noticed this and I've wondered if you considered this, this, and this, separating the 1, 2, 3 and the 3, 4 women's field would provide this, this, and this, or like, have you considered, making the women's and the men's elite payout, the same, reaching out to race directors with this feedback and then having, them come back to you to say, if you want to run your own race, you can do that. Like if you want to be in a position where you're telling someone else how to do it, then just do it yourself. And I think that's the worst way possible to encourage women to come out to an event, right? Or, feel supported and respected and safe. And, but also like, that's an example in which a male, and I'll use the dangerous word ally, if could say, hey, I hear you, like maybe I need to ask a such and such clarifying question, and then I will do the work of making it right. And that's still a change that's guided or facilitated by like a vulnerable user's experience. But then the labor of correcting and moderating the culture is done by the person who has the power. And that's how ideally how it should be done.
Well, that's what we're trying to do.
But
that's what I'm trying to do. I mean, very personally, that's what I'm trying to do.
It requires that the people that are in power in those seats, are able to listen and have a value of implementing change.
Are you? I don't know everybody that listens to this, but I hope the people who listen to this are some of the people that we're talking about, because it's an uphill battle. And as a race director, and I actually technically I'm not a race director anymore. I suppose I'm the director of the entire series, but I don't actually run any of the individual races. It's been an uphill battle for years to make these changes, and a lot of times I hear those statements. I hear the most common things that we hear. Smoke should come out of your ears when you hear these things, people, if you're listening. Yeah. I hear people say, oh, the payouts don't need to be equal because there's only, 10% of the racers are women, so why would they get half the payout? That doesn't make any sense. Just because you're a Cat 5 man or a Cat 4 man paying an entry fee, if some of that money is redistributed to elite racers, only 10% of the racers are Category 1 or 2 men also,
Right. Well, I think people just fail to realize how decisions like that impact culture, and that, women are smart and remember things. So, if you see,
very smart and remember everything, in my experience.
If you show up to a race and you're one of very few women in a field and you're like, cool, this is a small field. I'm bummed it's a small field. I am personally a woman in the small field. I am also bummed it's a small field. And then the race director gets in front of your field and says, welcome to the race. Fuck you for having such a fucking small field. You guys really need to do a better job promoting this race next year so your field will be bigger. And by the way, you're not getting a payout. We're not going to come back to your race anymore.
Yeah, you're not growing the race by saying that. Have you had somebody say anything that affirmatively negative? I mean, I know that that's the connotation, of course. If I get up and I say, we're not paying you out because only 10 of you came, I mean, that implicitly says F you and the horse you rode in on. Has anyone actually said that to you verbatim?
No one ever said fuck you for having such a small field, but they did say, it was an embarrassment, and that, there's not going to be a payout. How do you even call this a race? Some deep, deep, shamey stuff.
I mean, how many women are in that field? 10? 12? 4? 4 is not very many women. But it's still not appropriate. I would never. We've run races with 4 elite men, 6 elite men in our past. If you go into cross results and dig up old Nicross races, there have been times where there was 3 or 4 guys who showed up to ride a 1, 2, 3 race. You know what we did? We ran the race and we paid it out.
It's not the women's fault. Especially the women that are standing there in front of you.
Right.
I showed up for the freaking race. Don't yell at me.
Don't yell at me. I'm here.
No. It's your fault. Probably all the women that got yelled at last year didn't want to come back. So all the women that got yelled at last year and then got their payout cut at the line were like, fuck that race, I'll never go back there again. I felt like a pile of shit for even showing up. So, of course.
Did they get their race entry fee also refunded since they didn't do a payout? No, they didn't.
I'm pretty sure that's he dug his own grave. And after that, women are smart and they remember things. So, of course, I'm like, hey, if you don't want to feel like a evil bitch for even just showing up to a bike race, don't ever go there because it's awful. And I felt so small and so stupid for being there at the bike race that I would never want to put myself in that position again. And so, no, you can definitely assure yourself that you will never have a sizable women's field if this is how you treat women. So,
one of the things that we're doing, and we just came up with this idea this week, for the Nicross races, anyone who registers for the race gets a referral coupon code emailed to them through Bike Reg, because Bike Reg is spectacular and they allow us to facilitate these things, that provides a coupon code that allows a buy one get one discount for a woman entering the category 4-5 field. So instead of yelling at the women for not bringing people, what we're going to do is we're going to say to all the men, the hundreds of men who register for these races, hey, if you know a woman who you can encourage to come and try racing as a category 5 or a category 4, we'll give you a discount. You'll get half your registration refunded, and the woman will get a 50% discount on her reg.
Cool.
Pretty cool.
Is that only for, or if women sign up, do they also
it's for
get
everyone who signs up, yeah. So anyone who enters the race is going to get a coupon that returns into a buy one, get one to encourage a new racer to come. It has to be a category 4 or category 5 woman. 1, 2, 3 women are not getting the discount, but if you bring a new woman to the race, you get a 50% off coupon. And I'm just thinking about how the opposite angle of, criticizing women who actually are coming to the races for essentially not bringing more women is ridiculous and backwards. Yeah. What you got to do is you got to look at the people who are coming, the 200 men who come, and say, don't you all know athletic women? Don't you all have a wife or a girlfriend or somebody who might want to come with you to the race? How come you don't have them with you, So we're trying to create a little financial incentive to make a little bit of that happen. I know plenty of guys who have some of the Masters racers have daughters who race the NICA mountain bike races. They should bring them along and have them race a Category 5 cross race. No reason not to, or a junior cross race,
I will say that and I know that this isn't possible, feasible, or even necessary, but I will say that Go Cross's sponsorship of every women's registration for the UCI race Saturday and Sunday meant that for many of us, just because of the gesture of like, hey, women, we really want you to come race here, was a must-attend event for people just to show their support for like, it is so cool that you care this much that women come to your event, that you found a sponsor to cover registration. So registration was free across all women's categories, all of them, for both Saturday and Sunday. And again, so I don't think
Go Cross is just since it's in Virginia, right?
Yes.
And it was just sign up and boom, it's free
for women.
For women, right? Of course, yeah. Okay, let me ask you about that because
if it wasn't 600 miles away, I was planning on going.
Yeah, it's pretty far. So, do you? So we've talked about doing that. We've talked about doing 4 or 5 racing for free, and we actually settled on the idea that we wanted to really promote the racing in a meaningful way, but we didn't necessarily think that making it free was appropriate. And I'm interested to hear your opinion on this because obviously you have a high degree of knowledge about this area. I thought that it was actually important that it not be free. I thought it was almost patronizing to say, "Hey, look, it's free. Just come." So no. What do you think about that perspective? Because that was kind of we took that approach. That was how we reasoned to. Now there's a fee to race. We're going to do some promotional things to either discount the fees or encourage people to bring more people. But that we thought that if we're talking about not just making it like a sideshow, it should be something that still has a registration requirement and an obligation to pay. Are we wrong about that? Do you think that just making it free is a better move?
Again, instead of speaking on behalf of all women, let me...
I know that. I should qualify that. And for all our listeners, none of my questions are implying that as a current guest on our show who happens to be female, I think you are on a position of telling me what every woman thinks. I'm just curious. What's your opinion? Do you think that makes it... Go Cross was very popular and had a lot of women come. That gesture is clear. We thought about this a lot over the winter and we decided not to do it. And I'm wondering, maybe did we make the wrong decision? What do you think?
Yeah, so I was actually making an entry. So instead of speaking on behalf of all women, which I don't think you're actually asking me to do, but based on the registration numbers, like these women are speaking for themselves. Because like Sunday, men 4-5 category, 54 entries. Women's 4-5 category, 51 entries. That's a huge freaking field.
It's a huge 4-5 field for women, absolutely.
The men's 3-4 field, 36 entries. The women's 3-4, 29 entries. The UCI men, 37. The UCI women, 29. So I think like based on those numbers alone, women flocked to this race to say, heck yeah, that is awesome what you're doing. And we want to support it. And I can tell you for myself and for women in this region, women specifically made a trip down to this race because they didn't want to miss supporting an event that said, hey, you're super important to us. So no, I don't read anywhere that is patronizing.
I think you're right.
I mean, maybe somebody else feels a way differently about it, but I have not heard that at all. And based on these registration numbers, women are saying, heck yeah, that is so cool. And even just as a gesture, like, hey, maybe I don't even race cyclocross, but I want to come and show support. I'm coming to this event. I had a friend with a broken collarbone. She traveled down with us to support this event, even though she couldn't race. She traveled down from Long Island to go to this race in Virginia. So I think it was bold, loud, and brave, and cool thing to do.
Do you know, do you have any idea how they actually paid for, did they get a sponsor to pay for the costs?
Register free, courtesy of East Coasters Bike Shops. So shout out to East Coasters Bike Shops. They sponsored the entirety of the women's registration fees. And that's the thing also, is like they didn't parade this around. You just went to the event and you went to pay for the event, and the registration was $0. Like when I found this out, I stumbled upon it and I was like, what the heck? I was like, the UCI race is $0 both days? This must be a mistake. And then I went to this Facebook group that I'm a part of, and I see somebody else there posted, what the heck, you guys? The women's registration is, I see something in the event notes now, but it's kind of hidden. New for 2018, another full weekend, blah, blah, blah. Goat Cross is part of UCI. Roanoke Outside Beer Garden. Women can register free.
Yeah.
So they kind of just snuck it in there. But shout out to Coasters Bike Shop.
I'm doing my promoter brain. I'm doing the math in my head, and I'm saying, okay, well, the insurance costs are this many dollars per person, and payouts and number of fees and what else. I mean, to do those women's races at no registration fee, it's probably not actually that much money. It's probably, it's not like a crazy amount of money out of pocket. You could get a sponsor. Promoters, people who are listening to this podcast who might be thinking about putting a race on, mathematically, how much this costs. You can probably make women's racing free at your event this year and see if it pans out. And it's not going to cost you. It doesn't cost you the full amount of what the registrations would multiply out to. It costs a tiny fraction of that, Perhaps
inverse to your couponing theory here. It's like all of us that are racing for free, we're bringing, we're dragging the men along in our lives. Like, hey, you got to come down to this race in Virginia because I get to race for free. And
did you bring anybody with you who had to pay registration? Did you bring any men with you in your group?
I did.
Yeah, of course. Of course, yeah. You know what? I thought I was being super smart when I didn't do any work Tuesday and just spent all day working on the series. And I'm like, brilliant idea. What we'll do is we'll make it. My original idea, we had to change it today. My original idea was, now I'm embarrassed that I even thought this and didn't immediately see the pitfalls of it, but I did. Was that you would get a registration coupon when you registered saying, have someone punch this code in for the 4 or 5 women, and then you get a full refund of your reg, and they would have to pay 100%. My theory was that I would use it to motivate people to go out and get other people to register. But then I said, wait a minute, that makes the women pay and the men get free racing. That doesn't make any sense. We have to make it a 50-50, so it's like a buy one get one. The goal was to make 2 for 1, but I didn't want to, I was the way that we had originally written the code for the coupon, it would have been that the woman was paying. And I was like, no, hold on, we have to change that.
Yeah, I think that there's this kind of thing, with equity in bike racing, and I know how truly draining it is a freaking job, and the numbers never add up. Being a race director, a race promoter, it's absolutely thankless, and making even breaking even is a freaking job. So I know that we're coming at it from a scarcity mindset, and that is like valid and real. And I think like what Go Cross did here that's like so out of the hat is they just found a way to kind of like flip the script on its head. And like, as far as I know, this is the first year they've done this, but this is going to speak volumes for them for years to come.
And if they do
like, they hosted a quality event, and like all of the women's fields were stacked. So the women all want to come back because they all had such great competitive fields and awesome experiences and like, you know, really cutthroat competition. And, you know, like, that is the fullness of such a positive race that's not coming at it like scraping for every next entry. That like, I think that this is a real power move for them. And it took a lot for them to execute in this first year, but it's going to pay off for them for years to come. And I think that that's a really awesome way to approach the problem in a new way. And I think we have sometimes trouble thinking creatively and having the kind of like the courage to just try a new big thing like that.
Continuing in my mathematical head, I'm sure now also they'll do this next year again, possibly, right? Or next year they'll say women race for half price, and then the year after they'll say, okay, women are now full price. And they'll have a community built where they now have. It looked like I looked at the bike reg pre-reg just now while we were talking, and it looked like they had about 40% of the field was women, whereas typically 10% or less is women at most of these races. They just essentially doubled their race turnout. It probably had practically no cost.
Yes.
And now they've got a community of people that. You know, if you hear next year that you have to pay, are you going to just absolutely not go because you have to pay? No, you'll probably go, right?
I'm going because I like, you know, they voted for their race and said it's important to our race that women are here, that women are having a positive experience, that women are prioritized at this event. And that speaks loudly, and women are smart and they remember things, like I said. So we're going to remember that. And it's not about the $35. It's not about the $35. It's about the language that they're using to communicate with us. And that's like, that was just a very subtle but very powerful way to say, like, your race is prioritized here, you know?
Yeah, right.
The UCI elite women raced last, which is, you know, in another interesting way, flipping the script of like whose event is the premier event of the day.
We've been talking about doing that. We didn't do that, and I'm sad to say that we didn't make that change in our series schedule this year. And to some degree, what it had to do was the fact that we combined a number of fields to be the men's 1, 2, 3 field at the end of the day, and we were just like, you know what, we want all those people hanging around. We played category manipulation to cause a large field at the end of the day. And I was like, should we have the women's race last, or should we have this 50-person race last? Well, if we have the women's race last, everyone, unfortunately, a lot of people may leave before the women's race happens, which has happened in the past, right? We have, with it as the second to the last race of the day, sometimes there's no one around when the women's race is happening. So our goal now is to have people exposed to the women's racing. We put the category 4 or 5 field and the 1, 2, 3 women's races, which are separate events, but they're back to back. In the middle of the day. Mark, are they back to back, or is there a race in between? I forget now, actually. But
back to back.
The point is that they're both in the middle of the day at times that the venue should be filled with people. The women don't race at 8:30 in the morning anymore. They race at the 2 time slots that are probably the best. The last race of the day is not necessarily the best, frankly. It's supposedly the most prestigious, but in the grassroots race, a lot of the times everybody's left by the time it happens. No one's hanging around to watch the 4-person Cat 2 race, you know?
People are gone.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that having the women's race last is something that I'm personally pushing for. I kind of I've seen that it's happening at a few other UCI races, and I'm like intrigued because it could come along with that kind of, we're switching things up so that it doesn't just feel like the men's elite race is the last and premier event to happen, but it could also just be like actually racing last is the dick spot and the elite men don't want it anymore, So
I think it's different in a UCI race. There's some stark differences between grassroots style races and UCI because at an international level event, there's a level of professionalism in the field that you don't typically get at local races. So our Nightcross races, we like to think of them as sort of the best grassroots races around our area, but it's still, you don't have a 50-person deep field with a bunch of people with UCI points. At a local race, whether it's a men's field or a women's field, we have sadly in the past we've had times where that hour-long men's race at the end of the day has 6 people in it because only a couple Cat 1s and Cat 2s show up, and that's the dick spot to have for sure. I don't want to stick the women in that. The spot to have is for sure the that kind of middle of the day spot where like all your large fields of racers have either just happened or are going to happen, and then everyone's around, and that's that's the one that's for our racing. Historically, it was the Cat 3 men's race. The Cat 3 men's race was the one that had all the people around watching, and then people either went home or they raced later in the day. But there wasn't that many people racing later in the day. We've stuck the women in that slot, so now everyone will be around when the women are racing instead of either already left or not even to the venue yet because they're racing at 2:00. But anyway,
right.
So I'm thinking that we should maybe put a challenge out to our community of listeners in the Nightcross region and say that if we can get someone to provide the sponsorship money, we will do free race entry for women. But it's a call out to the people who are listening here. We got to put the money together to be able to pay for it because our series does not have a budget to just absorb it. Just like Go Cross had East Coasters Bike Shop help pay to cover it, we would need somebody to do that. But if somebody wants to contact me, if somebody listens to this next week and wants to contact me and say, we can throw in some money to cover for the insurance costs and cover the prize money, we can do that. We will put it out there and make racing free for women in upstate New York as soon as someone calls me and says, I'll pay for the insurance. That's all we got to do, and the prize money.
Yeah. Well, I'll definitely be curious to see, if Go Cross, just goes back to full registration fees for everyone. Like, does that loyalty stick? Like, 'cause I really think that it will. They only had to speak that loudly once,
Yeah, I mean, you commit to it, and then you grow. This is one of the things we've been talking about internally is trying to grow a culture of women who are racing who feel, just using the words that you've used very articulately today, that they feel safe, that they feel that they're welcome, that they feel that it's a good place to be. Cycling as a community has not done a great job of that over the years, and what we're trying to do is turn the events a little bit on their heads and make it so that that it's easily approachable and that it falls into that category. And I don't know. I mean, we're trying to do that, I guess, but it is an uphill battle, especially when you have some traditional entities that you're working in a top-down structure with, and they don't necessarily get it that that's the thing to do,
Yeah.
That should be a challenge. USA Cycling should pick up the tab for the per rider fee for women. That's what they should really do. Derek, are you listening? Derek, paging Derek Bouchard Hall. Knock off that $3.75 fee for each woman, and then it makes it easy for the promoters to say we really don't have to charge for most of this because I can absorb some prize money and some merchandise prizes for the lower categories. But insurance adds up, and if you're paying an entry fee, some of that money goes to USA Cycling. Let's make that a commitment to not do that. I know Derek Bouchard Hall is not listening to this. Well, maybe he is. His brother was on the podcast once. Kevin, if you're listening, send your brother a text with that idea. Is there anything else that you want to talk about that won't be a hour and a half tirade that results in me like yelling at USA Cycling and trying to get Derek Bouchard Hall to like, tweet at me?
So we talked about, we didn't talk about that. Okay. That's someone just highlighted.
Hi.
So I live in Philly. I train with Chab. I raced Crits Cross MTB. I did Intelligentsia Cup this year in Chicago. I has already got.
What you want to tell? You want to tell our listening community what intelligence? I can't even say it. Go ahead and say it again.
Intelligentsia.
Intelligentsia Cup. What is that?
It is a crit racing series in and around Chicago. It's 10 days of crit races. Although they were actually...
Is it 10 days in a row? Is it basically like a stage race of criteriums?
It is an omnium. And I misspoke because this year 6 of them were crits and 4 were technically classified as road races. So crits and road races in and around Chicago 10 days in a row. So that was that. It was very hot. It was very hard. They had incredible turnout in the elite women's 1, 2, 3 and this awesome women's 2, 3 field that they had.
So they actually had a 1, 2, 3 and a 2, 3?
Yeah.
So you had a choice of, I suppose if you're a Cat 1, you don't have a choice. But if you're a 2 or a 3, you had a choice of sort of a little more mild flavor or full-on extra hot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was very cool. I did many 2, 3s and a couple 1, 2, 3s.
And because it's an omnium, you don't have to race like a category every race. You can pick what you're doing.
If you're contending for, if you're concerned with your results in the omnium, you would choose.
Yeah, you'd want to stick in the same field, probably, right?
Yeah. But if you're, interested in a varied race experience, which for me as a 2, I can consistently ride towards the front of a 2, 3 race and really try and hang on and learn and get some speed work and training in a 1, 2, 3 race. Like, that's fantastic to be able to hop back and forth.
That is fantastic. That's a really good opportunity. Is Chicago secretly the greatest city in the world?
Philly is secretly the greatest city in the world, but Chicago...
That's the right answer. That's the perfect answer.
Yeah. Chicago's pretty damn cool. I mean, I grew up in Michigan, so I grew up, on those lakes and grew up going to those beaches and being like, the ocean, but it's actually a lake, and so for me, going to Chicago and seeing the way that people do summer in Chicago is very reminiscent to my childhood of beach life, city life. So that's pretty
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Have you ever been to the Upper Peninsula?
I have. On a 5th grade field trip, I had a pen pal who was living in the UP, and we had nicknames for each other. So on my field trip, I got to meet her, and we ate fudge together. That's
that's hilarious.
Yes. So I was Intelligentsia. Drove out there in the van.
I saw a picture of the van on your Instagram feed. Can you describe the van for our listening community?
It's the first vehicle I've ever owned.
That's your van?
Oh yeah, it's my van.
Oh, that's spectacular. I don't know why I'm surprised. I think I just saw stickers on it. It says Philly Bike Expo. It's all logoed up, right?
Oh yeah, give them all the credit, but no, it's...
I just assumed that it was some kind of, corporate product or something. That's actually your personal car, and you've like wrapped it with Philly Expo stuff.
Yeah, it's my van.
That's really, really awesome and crazy, by the way. That's also a crazy person thing to do.
To make it look like I'm more sponsored than I am, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I frankly, I've contemplated buying like vehicles that would just be sort of silly vehicles to have, and then getting them wrapped with like a Nycross wrap so that it would, like, when I pull up at Gloucester, I look super pro, but then I would get last in the Cat 3 race and people would be like, who is this guy? You know? So yeah, that thought has crossed my mind, but you've taken it to another level. You've actually done it.
There's nothing about this Chevy that says I'm super pro. So, I mean, I think, like, if you were to come to Philly Bike Expo, if you were to meet Steven and Bina, like, you would get the gist of, like, the flow of our relationship a bit more. It's like they really freaking go out of their way to support my cycling career. Like, when they first reached out to me, it was very much a, like, we just have this idea that, like, you could be involved and, like, help us with some marketing stuff, like, super, you know, casual, part-time volunteer basis. And I was like, that's really cool. Like, what are you thinking? What do you have in mind? And Steven was like, I have no idea, to be honest. And I was like, I have an idea. Like, what if I raced bikes, like, and just, like, wore a jersey with your logo on it, you know? Have you heard of this? and they went for it. So it was like a brand new thing that we kind of just, like, are trying out, and it just happens to be working enough for us to keep trying it out, you know? But it's, like, by no means any kind of official pro team. Like, we're just out here trying to, like, do cool stuff on bikes, and it happens to be, like, a really good fit. So, you know, when I've got, like, Philly Bike Expo and Belinky Cycle Work slapped all over the van, it's because, like, I love Steven and Bina and I love what we're, like, doing together, less than it is, like, I really want to sell my sponsorship, you know?
And you also really wanted to make sure that your van had no resale value. That was part of it too, right?
Yeah. Also totally removable.
They're totally removable. I made sure. I wasn't gonna commit them so hard that you couldn't take the stickers off. That's perfect. I'm very serious about this, but not so serious as to make stickers that have permanent glue. This might be an excellent spot to wrap it up. Is there so we've been talking about your Instagram feed and these different, you know, electronic means of communication. Is there if our listeners would either like to follow you or get a hold of you or keep track of your racing pursuits and become a fan, is there a good way for them to do that?
My handle is at Shrimp Muffin Haberdashery. And you can...
We'll include that in the show notes so that it's typed out.
Muffin. I'm pretty sure I'm the only one. And
yeah, you don't want to be at Shrimp Muffin Haberdashery 2. That's not cool.
I don't know, 78. And I would just encourage folks to come hang out with me at the Philly Bike Expo the last weekend of October.
That is that October 27th and 28th?
That is correct.
That if you're not racing at the Nycross Series race that takes place on the 28th, obviously the best place in the world to be is the Philly Bike Expo.
Yeah, or like come to Philly on Saturday and race Nycross on Sunday.
Boom, that's what you should do. Perfect.
Do it all.
Taylor, it's been excellent talking to you. Thank you so much for being on our show.
Hey, thank you both for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Hopefully we'll see you out there on the cross course getting some stellar results and fighting the good fight. Thanks so much for doing everything you do.
I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Amateur Hour CX. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at mwalling, and Eric pretends he's a show account, which you can follow at Amateur Hour CX on Twitter. Don't forget to subscribe in your podcast player of choice so you get our next episode soon. Thanks. See you then.
You know what? My computer we were talking about the Mac that I usually record these things on, and it's down in the basement next to the beer fridge. That's another reason to record on that computer, actually.